Rabbi Sari, when you read the passage that you read about in-betweens, honestly, it stuck in my brain, and the entire rest of the service, that's what I was thinking about, and how we wish that we could be more often than not in a moment of certainty or a moment of clarity or a moment when we didn't have to feel ourselves wondering if this was the right place to be. But so often, more often than not, we're in between. More often than not, we're thinking about the alternatives, or more often than not, the position we're in is not one that's clear. Traveling in Israel last month, I was often finding myself in that in-between place. I'm not going to get into it because that's another sermon, but one can't go to Israel and travel around Israel without feeling moments of, wait, what's the right path? What's the right direction? And what I'm going to share with you tonight also speaks to how so often in life we live in those in-betweens, and we have to balance even conflicting ideas in our minds at the same time. So I'd never heard of Suleika Jawad until I read her story written in The Atlantic. Now, chances are you haven't heard of Suleika either, unless you get The Atlantic. But you know her husband, if you've ever watched The Tonight Show, The Late Show rather, with Stephen Colbert, it's John Batiste. Suleika is a published writer. She has written a column for the New York Times. She writes an online magazine with over 160,000 subscribers. It's called Isolation Journals. And she's also an accomplished artist, opening a show in New York next month. At 35, she's clearly an underachiever. But under that success is a far darker story. In 2011, she was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia. She was given back then, a 35% chance of survival. And amazingly, after a brutal treatment regime, the cancer went into remission until 3 years ago. After receiving bone marrow transplants from her brother, her future, she's a little stable, more stable, but her future is far from certain. She still has bouts of violent illness, and it's probably mostly brought on by the meds that she has to take to manage the potential rejection of that bone marrow. From the very beginning, Suleika chose to share her journey of sickness and health with the world. And it's a brutal story. It's a story of nausea and hair loss and infertility and menopause at 22 and unimaginable pain. It's a story of brokenness. But she layers onto the story of brokenness wholeness. She writes and speaks about spiritual fulfillment, about love, about finding purpose and meaning. From the very beginning of her illness, she kept a daily journal. She later turned it into a book. It's called Between Two Kingdoms, A Memory of Life Interrupted. It spent 22 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. The title was taken from words written by Susan Sontag, who also died from a similar disease at the age of 71. The sentence from Sontag's book, which is equally profound and also captures that in-betweenness, is, "Everyone who is born holds dual citizenship in the kingdom of the well and the kingdom of the sick." Hence, Between Two Kingdoms as a title for Suleika's book. If she were bitter, solitary, fearful of opening her heart to anyone else, we'd understand that. And yet, in this Atlantic article, they told the story of her love and marriage to John Batiste, and the story is inspirational. They met at band camp when they were in high school. They went their separate ways, only reconnecting years later, and they were finally married in 2022. Batiste's commitment to her is beautiful. They capture some of his words in the article, and hers to him is a testament. It's both of their love for each other is a testament to the power of companionship to mend broken lives. So hold on to that story, Suleika's story, as I take you into an insight that I shared on Wednesday for Shavuot, but I think it's so profound it bears sharing to a wider audience. It's not my profoundness, it's the person I'm going to tell you about its profoundness profundity that I think makes it relevant. Now, the Torah says, on Shavuot, of course, we celebrate the giving of Torah. The Torah says that when Moses came down from Mount Sinai and he saw the Israelites cavorting in front of the golden calf, he shattered those 2 tablets that were written by God into many, many, many fragments. And it wasn't only until after the Israelites were forgiven, that he went back up to the mountain, and now Moses himself carved his own version of the 2 tablets of the 10 Commandments. So the Talmud, in its infinite wisdom, asks, well, what happened to the broken fragments? Did Moses just leave them on the ground? And it answers its own question by saying, no, he picked them up and he put them into the ark so they'd always be together with the whole fragments created by a human being, next to the broken fragments created by God, broken by a human being. Rabbi Aaron Goldscheider, he's the creator of a support group for parents who've lost children, says that those 2 sets of tablets in the sacred vessel that's the ark, the whole and the broken, are a symbol of how brokenness and wholeness not only can but often do exist within one human being, one vessel, a human being. They're connected. They live side by side. So obviously it's an important message to parents who've lost children and go on to live their lives. But it's also, I think, an important message to all of us about that complexity of life. In one human heart, perhaps in yours, there can be pain and loss and suffering and sorrow, and also there can be joy and celebration and fullness. And often those 2 apparently conflicting states of existence are in a heart at the same time. So the companion reading for Shavuot is the book of Ruth. And it's a Torah version, a perfect illustration of Rabbi Goldscheider's insight. Briefly, the story is about Naomi and her daughters, Ruth and Orpah, daughters-in-law, I should say, who are broken by loss. Their husbands die, and they're left indigent and stateless. Then Naomi urges her daughters-in-law to return to their people. Go, find new husbands. Orpah, one daughter, leaves, and she returns still broken to her family. The other daughter-in-law, Ruth, in dedication to her mother-in-law, pledges her fate to Naomi and Naomi's people, and she says these famous words, "Your people will be my people, your God will be my God. Where you go, I'll go. Where you're buried, I'll be buried." In a word, essentially, it's, I won't abandon you. And that decision of Ruth's, along with Naomi's decision to allow her, begins their collective path to wholeness. The 2 broken women towards wholeness. Naomi's taken by Ruth's gesture of dedication and kindness. So when they come across Naomi's distant cousin, a certain older gentleman named Boaz, Naomi advises her daughter-in-law how she might capture Boaz, how she might seduce him. And it starts out, and we think that's going to happen, but it turns out that Ruth only partially follows the plan, because though they meet on the floor of the threshing area in the darkness, and though the Bible says she uncovers Boaz's feet, it seems that nothing more than that happens, that she really only uncovers his feet, it seems. And they both remain chaste through the evening. But he's struck because he has seen her kindly work with his other women in the field, and he's struck by her kindness, and he pledges to redeem her from her impoverished wandering, and she returns his affections, and after some ancient legalities about levirate marriage, I'm not going to go into it here, ask me if you want more information, they're married. So Ruth conceives, and the childless Boaz gains a son, and the promise of progeny heals his solitary brokenness. And from the union of these 2 broken souls arises the great Israelite king, the unifier, King David. Ruth and Boaz are the ancestors of King David. So if the broken tablets next to each other against the whole tablets are the metaphor, that broken and whole can coexist in one sacred vessel, then the story of Ruth and Boaz, it's the human version of how love and compassion, companionship and purpose allow brokenness and wholeness not only to exist, but ultimately for wholeness to surpass the brokenness. Well, that's the power, I think, of Suleika's message as well. Why so many people listen to what she has to say. It's not just because people might be battling their own illness, but it's because there are insights in her experiences that even those who are not battling can take away. She's been broken in ways that are unimaginable to most of us. And yet, the way that she has structured her life so that she can seek wholeness, I think is what draws people to her art, to her writing, to her vision. And much of the power, and she admits it, comes from the people in her life. There's a line in the article that says, Suleika falls in love hard. Her life companion, John Baptiste, her friends, her readers, the people that she gathers to herself, help to heal that brokenness of her illness and allows it to coexist with the wholeness of a life that she finds meaningful. So I want to now take that message and connect it to what we're doing here, celebrating Pride Month and Pride Shabbat. We'll be, by the way, back again, not only next week, but we'll have a speaker on the 28th. I invite you to come listen. Because Pride Shabbat, Pride Month, Pride in general, is about strengthening a society in a way that allows the lives of the LGBTQ community to create wholeness within that society. Because what we don't understand, or what we haven't understood in the past, for those of us who have not been allies and supporters, is that when lives have to be hidden from the public view, when essential identities have to be suppressed, when companionship is denied, when normal is defined in ways that denies others the capacity, the ability to be their true versions of themselves in the expression of their physicality and their love, then what our society does is it forces people to live in brokenness. These 2 pages are stuck together. Whoops, there we go. It's not supposed to happen. So it allows people, it forces society to live in brokenness. And I have to admit, I actually thought this battle was over. I thought we were done with it. I thought, we had reached a place where we wouldn't have to have this conversation anymore. And certainly in Los Angeles, this should be done. And yet we still have school districts in this state that are banning books with LGBTQ subjects. We have parents in this city who recoil at any normalization of lesbian and gay relationships in their children's schools. We have families who refuse to embrace their LGBTQ children and force them out. The brokenness that these attitudes create is astounding, and it is inexcusable, and it shouldn't exist. A few years ago, my wife and I were in Reykjavik. It's Iceland's largest city, which, in all honesty, is not saying much. But it was their Pride Month. And down the middle of the main shopping districts were pride flags painted over the white lines by the city. But most surprising of all, there were 2 massive construction cranes on buildings, skyscrapers going up. And from those construction cranes, there were pride flags flying. Now, in all honesty, we don't usually associate construction workers with pride, do we? Unless it's the village people, but that was then, this is now, right? But there it was in Iceland with construction cranes and pride flags flying. Acceptance, what I'm trying to say, was just a part of the fabric of Reykjavik. So I ask you, what would it take for it to happen here? What would it take for us not to need Pride Month or Pride parades? What would it take for us not to have to call and remind people that we have to normalize the varieties of the expression of our humanness? What would it mean for us to post flags from on our homes, hang them from our churches, all our churches, our synagogues, and yes, even our construction cranes? Doing that, and then, I think we could transform the brokenness that still endures in our society, of life paths denied, the brokenness of relationships suppressed, into something far different, into loving, into sheltering, into loving embraces of allyship and companionship, and we can take responsibility in knowing that we have created a society, a culture, a world that fosters wholeness. Ken Yehi Ratzon, so may it be.